We've been living through what we could consider an ego era. An era in which the ego structure and ego functioning is the dominant aspect of consciousness. This has not always been the case. In fact, if you remember our 4 levels of analysis, it used to be the case long, long ago that the Paramatman was actually the dominant force in consciousness and ruling over the phenomenal plane. And then there was a second yuga. That was called, well, I won't even say it was Sat Yuga. It was actually not. It was actually Sangam Yuga. Sat Yuga, the Atman reigns. And then there's a Treta Yuga, in which the Atman and the soul are together, but the Atman is still dominant. And then there's a Dwapar Yuga, in which the relationship changes. The soul now gives birth to the ego, and the influence of the Atman dies away. And then there's a final Kali Yuga, in which the ego is completely dominant. So, at the beginning of Kali Yuga, the ego was in its most coherent, powerful form. When any new structure is born, it's born in a sattvic state. It's born in its highest form, its purest, most archetypal form. And the ego is an archetype. And so when the ego first forms and gradually takes over and creates an ego era because of its strength, and the soul is too exhausted and ripped apart by previous lifetimes to be able to remain the dominant factor, the ego takes gradually control over the social structures so that they become egos writ large. And everything mirrors that ego structure, macro and microcosmically. And the soul in that state is put on a reservation. And the reservation for the soul in our culture was the female. And so the female was to remain the oasis of soul consciousness while the male ego became dominant. Okay? And that was the whole idea of the patriarchy. And why women in nearly all cultures until this postmodern period remained covered and modest, so they did not provoke a sexual reflex in males, because they were not to be objects of sexual desire. They were to be the oasis of soul consciousness. They were to provide love and support to the man who goes out and kills the monsters and brings back the butter and the bread and all of that, right? So the whole idea of the hunter-gatherer kind of thing, and the male is the hunter and goes out and is the warrior and is the one who fights the battles out there while the women are raising the children, and that kind of a model gradually, of course, became corrupted and degraded, and women would no longer stay in that ghetto underneath the burqa, and they broke free, but in order to then fight as egos. And the last bastion of soul consciousness dissipated and dissolved. So now we're at the point where we're at the end of the ego era. And the world, the geopolitical forces that needed dominant egos in order to create corporations and multinational organizations and central banks and all of that kind of apparatus, it needed strong egos. You can't create empires without massive egos. Well, the empires are collapsing. As you see today, the egos running the empires don't know what they're doing, and the collapse is going extraordinarily fast because there are idiots at the helm of all the ships or dodgem cars in this earth plane, And there are no adults left, as they say, no beings who can function outside of this very nasty egoic paradigm. And therefore, all structures of authority have lost their legitimacy, and they're coming apart because of power struggles and conflicts of every sort, because egos cannot remain in harmony and cooperating with others. And all of the things we've already discussed, I won't elaborate all of that again. But the point being, the geopolitical forces that run the world don't need or want egos anymore. They've replaced them with robots. Seriously, there are robots running the world today. And Skynet is in place, and the whole thing is computerized. And they are training men not even to want sex with a real woman, but with a sex bot, you know. There's a real political movement to destroy the last vestiges of the human dignity and the human sense of spirituality, and taking away all meaning from relationship. And they do that deliberately through pornography and through a general dumbing down of the human ego. And that's what the educational system is meant to do. It's meant to make you lose your curiosity to learn and to repress your creativity, and either to feel like you are a robot imprisoned in a system that doesn't want your creativity or your truth or your light or your love, just wants you to be a cog in a machine that doesn't function anyway. But the point is that you're not even trained to be aware of the fact that you're being dumbed down, okay? So you will accept it all as a zombie and run the cash register or whatever you're assigned to do by the system. But it no longer wants leaders, it no longer wants really clear thinkers, it no longer wants beings who can revolt against the system and overturn it to create something more beautiful and more meaningful. So the ego is on its way out. It's being destroyed by the system. We don't need to kill it, quite frankly. Let the system do that, okay? That's not really the problem. The ego is in a state of collapse. If the ego could still function, there would be no reason for this kind of a healing institution. The ego cannot function. People cannot sustain their lives, not even their couple relationships. They can't raise children. They can't run electric grids or even, drive the bus without going off the road. I mean, they can't do anything. They literally are functioning less and less well every day. Ask any employer, and their only real problem is personnel. They cannot find people who are reliable, who will pay attention long enough to be able to do something without dropping the ball or, committing some, horrible mistake. And then quitting, and saying, I don't want to work here anyway, and none of them will be loyal to a corporate mission. And of course, the corporations long ago stopped being loyal to their employees. They used to hire people for life and give them pensions when they retired and all of that. It was a system in which there was still some mutual support. That's all dead. It's now savage, cutthroat, and you're hired as a temp worker with no benefits and no future, et cetera, et cetera. So they're not interested in developing people and to higher levels of refinement and capacity like they used to be. And the corporations and the other social and religious institutions had that function. No longer, as obviously you know, because of all the scandals, that the corruption is actually causing the systems that are supposed to raise us to degrade us. Okay, I don't want to go too much into that, but that's the macrocosm. That's not the difficult point for us. We can accept all of that politically and understand where the whole thing is going, but are we going to go down with the ship? Or is it possible to get off this Titanic before it sinks? That's really the only question. It's already hit the iceberg. We all know that. But there are still people in the casino playing, as if there's plenty of time before we get into a lifeboat. Let me just, win one more hand of blackjack or whatever. Well, it's not going to work that way. But there are people who are deferring to the last minute, awakening from this dumbed-down zombie condition. So it would be useful to know why, I think, right? Is anybody interested to know why? Have you thought about this? This is a major problem. For me, it's a major technical problem because my job is to awaken you, and I'm failing miserably, so I need your help. So we're not in an ego era anymore. And, this is why pretty much everybody I meet is in Egoholics Unanimous. It used to be just Alcoholics Anonymous. Now it's not anonymous because everybody meets everybody else there, There's nobody who's either not going or who will be going next week, So we're all egoholics, and we won't let go of the damn ego, even though it's the Titanic that's taken us down. So it would be useful to know what is causing us to hold on to this death drive, this self-sabotage. And it is an addiction to the ego. Okay, so why would we be addicted to our enemy? Right? We know that we are not really egos, and the ego is a structure of consciousness that one has chosen to identify with. It's a computer program. You get that? It's a program. It is a program that is obsolete. It does not work. It's one of those programs that some companies will release that has so many bells and whistles on it that it will crash the moment you try to do two things at once, and it cannot function. It looks really good on the outside, and you read all the things it's supposed to be able to do, but the ego actually can't do anything. And it will fall into a hole as soon as you ask it, to do one more thing than it's supposed to do. Work ends at 5. I will not stay till 5:01. I'm sorry, and if you make somebody do that, then they're going to have a meltdown or a temper tantrum or whatever. So they can't creatively go beyond whatever box that they've been put in, and they can't even function within that box anymore. So what is going on? What is the fear that would keep one using a program that does not get you the results that you want? Right? Most people will delete it and get a new program. They will upgrade the system. The ego cannot be upgraded. It's being downgraded, you see. The only way to deal with the situation is to get out of the ego entirely. And then realize you do not need that kind of a program, and you want to create a customized program at the very least, because the ego that you are saddled with has algorithms in it that you did not put in there. It's like when you go on to websites now and they put a cookie into your program or something like that. I need to figure out how to get them out, but my computer's probably got 100 cookies. Who knows what it's doing to the thing? I don't know. Don't answer that question. But the point is that your ego is having cookies dropped into it almost in every interaction that you have. And you're being controlled and moved around and manipulated by all of these cookies that you think you want to eat too, and therefore you're not going to let go of them, right? They're called that for a reason. They're bait, clickbait, but once you get the bait, you can't get it out so very easily, can you? So the ego is full of all of these foreign objects that actually make up most of the things that you think about that have nothing to do with you, but they're put in there by other people, or commercials, right? Or internet messages and subliminal ones at that, and all kinds of other external influences that are not necessarily benevolent. So the ego is a program that is dysfunctional and obsolete. But what happens if you delete the program? You see, the problem is the program is who you thought you were. And the moment you delete it, you will realize you don't know who you are. and that you don't know how to function, because the ego functions by knowing how other people see you, or at least believing you do. It projects a world in which it then knows how to react to. It's really only reacting to its own projection, but it can usually drop enough cookies in other people that they'll act in a way that it projects that they're supposed to act, right? So the ego is very good at that, and it'll arrange things to make it believe that it lives in a consistent world. And it wants to live in that consistent world. And that's why when there's any change, if somebody dies or leaves, your world is no longer consistent and you start to get destabilized. This is the mourning phenomenon. But it actually is not just limited to that. It's limited to any change or loss that takes place either on the external or on the internal psychological plane. And this is the key, because the ego doesn't want to lose its own internalized superego figures, its internalized fantasy figures, its internalized others that make it feel like it's not alone. Okay. So, if you want liberation, how many people want liberation from the ego? Yeah? All right. You're crazy. If you do, this will enable you to get it today. The bad news is God equals abandonment. And the ego operates for one purpose only, which is to avoid abandonment. The ego is terrified of abandonment. And to reach God means you have abandoned the ego. The ego has been abandoned. You have deleted it. You've done the worst possible thing you can do to yourself. And so the moment you begin to go out of the ego's terror of abandonment and its fury that you would dare consider leaving it for God, will cause it to have such a meltdown that you will not get 2 inches away from it before you're pulled back. You'll be accused of disloyalty. You'll be accused of being an idiot. You'll be accused of being a fraud. You'll be accused of being someone who won't be able to handle it. You'll see. You'll be accused of somebody. You'll be sorry. You'll miss out on all the jouissance I could have given you, It will cause you to doubt this idea of going to God. And there is no God. You'll see. Atheism is true. Don't you dare go. I won't let you back if you go. I'll get somebody else. I'll get a spirit to come in and replace you. You'll see. I don't need you. It'll use any trick in the book. And you'll become so anxious the moment you start to go toward God, and the abandonment red lights are flashing, and the anxiety is welling up, and the little infant is screaming, "Come back, Mommy." And can Mommy really leave and be disloyal to poor baby ego? No, Mommy can't do that. Oh, sorry, God. I have a higher priority. How many can relate to that? Do you really want liberation? Or do you want to take care of baby ego? It's that simple, really. Okay, so in the Vedic system, they talk about gunas, right? These are qualities. The moment that you turn your attention toward God and say, yes, I'm going to abandon the ego, I'm done with it, I'm disgusted with it, it's a useless, hopeless, bumbling, obsolete program that crashes all the time, I'm free. The moment you do that, you go into sattva guna. You go into sattva guna and there's a reaction. Okay? Sattva guna does not come without a price. And the price is just what we talked about, that the ego will complain. And it will create fear. It will create a panic attack. It will do anything to try to hold you back in its orbit. Okay? If you can endure its attack upon you for daring to leave it behind and not give in to its screams, the screams will gradually die out. Okay? It will die of starvation if you do not feed it your attention. Okay? But you instead, if you pay your attention to it, you're feeding it, you're nourishing it, and you're acting as if it's a reality when it's just a memory trace and a program that doesn't function. Why would you want to continue to nourish that at the expense of your real self and your God consciousness? So, what happens is that at this moment, the sattva is able to see that the abandonment, because it equals God, it's a good thing. The abandonment is not something that's a danger. The abandonment is an abandonment of unreality, an abandonment of a delusion. Okay? But the ego that is left, that fragment that is not in sattva, but actually in tamas guna, because there's a little bit left in the tamas guna, the zombie little baby ego, it says, no, it's not that abandonment is God, it's that God is abandonment. And abandonment cannot be good. It's the worst thing in the world. It is the ultimate demon. Okay? And abandonment to the baby means death.